All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Top Design Tips for Grant Figures. This webinar is brought to you by BioRender, the drag and drop design tool for scientists, and is being held exclusively for Queen's Cardiopulmonary Unit. So I hope everyone is in the correct virtual room today and excited to learn some great general tips for improving your grant figures, as well as some practical tips on how to use BioRender to create those figures. And we can go ahead and get started. So BioRender Premium is available at Queen's Cardiopulmonary Unit. I hope everyone has accounts already, and then you can log in and follow along as we go. If you don't have an account or you have any questions, I did just list your license administrator there, Brooke Ring, and I know we have Brooke in the audience as well, so I'm sure she can help answer some questions in the chat as we go. Okay, and a few housekeeping items to get started. So this is kind of a webinar format, so it is a little bit more formal for our small group, but we can still communicate with each other. So if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat or in that Q&A feature. I also have my colleague, Chanel D'Souza, with me today, who's going to help me answer some questions as we go. Just a little reminder though, if you are typing in the chat, it does default to just all panelists when you first type it in. So if you want everyone to see your message, please just change it to, I think this has actually been updated. It now says everyone, but just change that setting to everyone so we can all see your message. Okay, and then the third way to communicate today is I do actually have a poll that I can run to get to know everyone here a little bit better. And I'm mainly just trying to find out if you've used BioRender before. I have another question there for your current field of study of research. I know everyone here is part of the cardiopulmonary unit, but then also when your next grant is due. So if you are attending this just to prepare for a grant you have coming up, let me know. All right, and while you are telling me a little bit about yourself, I can share a little bit about myself. So hello, everyone. My name is Sydney Burniston, and I am a scientific communicator and customer success manager here at BioRender. My background is molecular biogenetics, as well as biomedical engineering. But most importantly, I'm just really passionate about creating really beautiful scientific visualizations and empowering everyone else to do the same. All right, and I also have my colleague, Chanel, here. So I don't know, Chanel, if you want to hop off mute and say hi, introduce yourself quickly.
Thanks, Sydney. Hi, everyone. My name is Chanel. I'm actually the point of contact and will be working with Brooke to help bring BioRender to more and more people at QCPU. But I'm happy to hand the reins back to Sydney. Thanks for doing this webinar for us. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. All right, we'll get my face off the screen here now. And I might actually I'll keep my video on for now. Hopefully my cats don't join the meeting. But let's see this poll. So it looks like out of everyone here, we have some people who have used it many times and a few people who haven't used BioRender yet. So I will make sure to go through a little bit of a refresher so we're all kind of starting off on the same page. Okay, and in terms of grants, it seems like some people have one coming up in earliest maybe 1 month, but 1 to 3 months, 3 months. All right, and I'm happy to share some tips today. So I'm going to end that poll, close that out. All right, and our mission at BioRender is to empower the world to learn and communicate science faster through visuals. And a couple of use cases. So if you are also new to BioRender, I just want to point it out, kind of the many things that we see BioRender used for. So typically things like presentations, publications, and meetings. I frequently get told that people use BioRender as kind of their secret weapon when they have a big publication that they really need a really nice figure for, or a big presentation. But BioRender can be used for any kind of informal communication as well. So remember that you can always use it for things like email updates, maybe social media content, any onboard and training. But of course, what we're here to talk about today are grant proposals. And why are we talking about grant proposals? Well, it's because researchers are estimated to spend 25% of their time writing grants, and we want to help make that process a little bit easier, reduce the amount of time you're spending at least on the figures, and help your proposal really stand out from the crowd with really eye-catching figures. All right, and here's my blank slide. So I'm actually going to hop out of my presentation here. I'm currently presenting in BioRender. So I have all my slides on the side here. This is our canvas view of the app. So anytime you open up a new figure or start a new figure, you're going to be brought to this view here. If you're starting a new figure, you'll have a blank canvas, not an entire presentation already. But any figure that you open up in this canvas view, you can also pop out the slides on the side here to create your own slideshow. And since we do have some people that are new to BioRender, maybe I'll back up a little bit and take us right back out to the gallery. So if you are logging into BioRender, you are going to have this view here, our gallery view. This is where all of your figures are stored. So here under My Files, you can see all the figures I've created in BioRender. And we'll get some of them to load up here. You can see there's quite a variety. And I'm unorganized. I have everything kind of in the center here, but I can drag and drop any of these files into folders on the left. And apart from this created by me section, I also have this shared with me section. So other people can also share figures with me so we can collaborate on them, maybe collaborate on presentations. And they can share either entire folders with me. So like these ones down here, and I'll have access to any of the figures that they then drop into that folder, or they can just share individual files with me. And they'll live in this shared files section. Let's go back to my webinar presentation here. And I'll open it up again, take us back into that Canvas view. And we'll do a quick little orientation around this view so we all know what we're looking at. And I'll give it a second to load here. Here we go. Okay, so when we open it up, square in the middle, that is your page. Any icons that you include on that square will be part of your final figure. So you also have this gray space surrounding it. I like to think of that as my workspace. So you can drag out any icons into this gray space and just kind of keep them there for when you're ready to drag them into your figure maybe. But if I were to preview this figure, I'm only going to get what is actually on my canvas when I go to export or present, because we can also present in BioRender. So let's pull up that blank page here. On the left is my primary toolbar. So this is where I'm going to find all of my BioRender content. So anything like icons, our entire icon library is here. I can kind of browse through these categories, pull out any icons that I need. So I'll drag and drop functionality. Once it's here, I can start resizing them. With any icon selected, I also get this properties panel on the left. And this is where I can come to change any of the properties of that icon. So the icon color with my presets here, I can change. If none of these presets meet my needs, I can also come down here to this color overlay and select a specific color. So I can either try and color match with this color picker to something else on my canvas, or I can enter in like a hex code or RGB value to get a really specific color if I was trying to maybe adhere to some branding guidelines. And then at the bottom here, I can also change a few other characteristics of this icon. So I can change the transparency of it, the saturation of the color that I've selected, or I could even make it glow. So if I wanted to just maybe highlight one of these icons with a nice little glow, or maybe it's fluorescent green and I need it to glow as well, I can also add that glow in the color that I've selected. So this would be an example of our kind of most basic type of icon, our flat icon. It's kind of broken down into its smallest component already. The exception is some of them do have this kind of concept of layers here. So I could actually break this cancer cell down into its nucleus. And then I could color this nucleus separately from the rest of the icon if I wanted to. So here you can see I can change those colors independently. But for the most part, it's kind of already in its simplest form already. And that is in contrast to our other type of icons. So if I come back over to our icon library, we also have a type of icon called a grouped icon. And that's anytime you see this little purple box, it's letting you know that it is a grouped icon. So if I drag any of these icons out with the purple box, they're still going to have that purple box when I bring it onto my canvas. So I can always remember that I can actually double click on this or click down here where it says edit group. And I can break this out into multiple icons. So you can see here, I've double clicked in. I can now select the tumors on this mouse independently of the actual mouse. So if I was, say, maybe trying to show that I've changed the size in these tumors. So I've done something that's made these tumors shrink. I could maybe have this as my before figure, and then I could duplicate it. So Alt drag lets me duplicate this icon. And then this one, I could double click in and edit these tumors and change the size of them. So here I can now show on the exact same icon that I've shrunk these tumors. And because it's a grouped icon, it's going to give me that flexibility to select these other elements. And I can either remove them, change the color of them independently, or change the size of them. So now I can have this before and after where you can clearly see that the size of these tumors has shrunk. Okay, and our final little refresher item that I want to show you all. So also in our icon library, if I search for, say, a phospholipid membrane, you'll also see some icons that have this little paintbrush icon on top of it. And any of these are our bio brushes. So if I pull out any of this type of icon, and I've got a few different examples here. Let's do maybe this straight one. You can rotate it. Our bio brush icons, they are basically one type of icon that repeats along this little blue path or this blue line. And what's handy about them is that I can edit this blue line here, and these icons are always going to follow that path. So here I just have a straight line, but if I kind of pull on one end, it's going to add more phospholipids to it. And then I have this node in the center here, this little white node. If I click it, I can start to bend this line. And then as soon as I do that, I get another white node. So I could click that and I could create another bend over here. And I can basically just edit this path, and my icons are always going to repeat along it. So in this example, I have a phospholipid bilayer brush, and I can come over here. You can see I have a few different properties that I can edit on it. So if I wanted to, I could change the size of my icons that are repeating. I could change the icon that is repeating. So this is a membrane type brush. I could change it to maybe a more simplified looking membrane here. And now we just have this kind of double walled line. And if you like those brushes, you can find all of them in this brush section here and scroll through them. We have cell brushes, we have membrane brushes, and there's quite a few different options as we go, nucleic acid. Down here, we have protein and vessel brushes. Okay, so a quick refresher on kind of our main icon types. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that we also have templates. So third option down are our templates, and these are pre-made figures in BioRender that you can use. So we have scientific designers that create these figures. They're completely editable, so they are made out of all dynamic BioRender assets. So any of these figures here, you can add to one of your presentations. So say this one here, I have a pathway. If I needed this in my presentation, I can just click on it. I can replace my illustration. So in this case, it's going to fill this entire canvas and replace my icons. All right, and as I move my mouse around, you can see everything on here I can edit. So I can edit any of this text, any of these icons. I can start moving them around. I could replace them. Maybe I need to add more icons. I could start layering on more of these icons here. All of these templates that are available in this template gallery are for you to use and completely customizable. Okay, so that was our refresher. So let's now hop into our tips for grant figures. And I have not 4 tips to share with you today, but I'd say more like 4 categories of tips. So I have a few tips that fall into each of these categories. But what we're going to be talking through today is first layout and story flow, and then text and labels, alignment and spacing, and then finally color and contrast. And the other thing I'll point out, so these are going to be really general tips for your figures. But if you are applying to a specific grant, I also recommend that you go check out their website and their recommendations for your grant figures. I did pull up a few tabs here. So I know that it was specifically mentioned that people were interested in the CIHR grant. So I did pull up their application instructions, and I searched for figure, and I actually didn't see too many recommendations specific to this grant. So here, the main thing I saw was that they did specify for font, not to use condensed narrow font sizes or type density, smaller text in tables, charts, and figures, and graphs is acceptable as long as it's legible when the page is viewed at 100%. So, I mean, this is really important. A lot of people forget about what their figure is going to look like once it is inserted into their grant application, and they might make the text on it a little bit too small. So we do always recommend to think about how that figure is going to look when it is in the hands of the reviewer, because it's really important that they can understand everything on it and see all of the details that you've included in your figure. But for this specific grant, that was pretty much the only recommendation they had. The other one I frequently look at is the NIH grant. So in their figure section, they have a few more recommendations. So I did just pull up there. This is also the Write Your Application page. If I search for figure, they also give the recommendations to write clear headings, make the application as easy to navigate as possible. It's likely that your reviewer is reading through it pretty quickly or reading through many at the same time. So you want to make sure it's as easy to follow as possible, super, super clear. Let's see here. Use diagrams, figures, and tables and include appropriate legends to assist the reviewers to understand complex information. These should complement the text and be appropriately inserted. And then, of course, once again, make sure the figures and labels are readable in the size they will appear in the application. Bolding highlights key concepts and allows reviewers to scan the pages and retrieve information quickly. Once again, they are probably scanning pages and they need that information as quick as possible. So we will talk a little bit about creating a text hierarchy to help kind of order your information in order of how important it is and to help people really process that information in the right order. And then finally, we'll talk about utilizing white space effectively. So this is also extremely important and something people often overlook. So we will also be talking about that white space in this alignment and spacing section. Okay, so that was your reminder to always check out your specific recommendations, but let's hop into our general tips. So tip number 1, layout and story flow. This is a really great place for us to start, since this is actually probably where I would start if I was helping someone to declutter a figure, or in the NIH's word, make the figure as easy to navigate as possible. So there are, let's go to my next slide here, 8 simple compositions that we recommend that you follow. If anyone's ever attended a BioRender webinar before, you've probably seen this slide, and that's because it's really important. So each of these compositions, they read left to right, up to down, how most people do read. So we always want to kind of keep that flow, even if we're adding in more information. So we have these unidirectional flows here. But if it starts getting more complicated, we can also do the cyclical flow. Still always left to right, up to down. Same with the Z shape here. I've crossed out these 2 options in the bottom left corner, this M-shaped and L-shaped option. And that's because these are great compositions to follow. But for the specific use case of grant figures, I don't think they're as applicable. They're kind of more suited for like a large format figure. So maybe a poster where you have kind of these multiple panels, or maybe you have a large image over here for the L-shaped and these information panels running around it. I think for a grant figure, this is a little bit too much white space and unused space to be applicable for that grant figure. But what are extremely relevant are these fork-shaped compositions here. So either fork-shaped going horizontally or vertically. So frequently we might have something split into 2 specific aims. So these forked compositions are really great to follow. All right, and let's jump into an example. So I have a figure here that was actually submitted as part of one of our figure makeover webinars. And this figure here, I actually wanted to go through an exercise with everyone and kind of walk you through kind of the flow of this figure. And then what we did is we remade this figure to kind of force it into one of those compositions I just showed you earlier. And we'll look at kind of how it's a lot more effective and easier to follow. But for this original figure here, I'm going to grab my annotation tool. And what I want to do is just kind of show you how I look at this figure. And this is actually a great exercise for you to do with any of your figures. You could even get someone else to do it for you. They don't need a science background, but just get them to look at the figure and map out how they read it and how they process the information in it. So for this one here, we have our gut differences in gut microbiota. So when I first look at this figure, and sorry if I'm looking off to the side all the time, that's just where my second screen is. But anytime I start looking at a figure, I always look for a starting point. And I typically try and look at the top or at the left for my starting point, because when we read left to right, that's just where I want to start. But here I can see I've got this 2 sections of bolded text. I have over here and then over here. So bolded text indicates that there is a title to me. So I want to start at this bolded text, and I'm probably going to start over here just because it is on the left and that's my bolded text and that's where I want to start. And I think this is where I'm supposed to start, so that's great. So I'd read this, I'd come here, I've got these 2 cute little icons, and then I hit a fork. So I'm gonna have to take one path. I'll come up probably, because once again, I want to read top to bottom. I can see I have one outcome here, maybe this stress resilient mouse. And I'll probably read this, and then I kind of get pulled in by this arrow here, and I start wanting to read all of this information down here. And I think that's good because this looks like it's all related to this outcome. And then it kind of brings me down to this stress vulnerable mouse down here, which is kind of like my second fork. And then I'm kind of brought over here. I read this. I want to follow this back up and over. And then I've kind of missed all this information at the bottom. So I have to come back down, and maybe I'll come over here and then start reading this way, and then finally make my way over here. So if we were to look at this, it doesn't exactly follow one of those compositions that we looked at before. I'm kind of all over the place like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and let me clear these drawings and exit my annotation tool. We're going to try and force it into one of these compositions here and see how much easier it is to follow. So I think a good candidate would be one of these kind of fork-shaped compositions, because we do have these kind of 2 different possible outcomes. So let's go ahead and look at this after composition that our illustrators were able to put together. Okay, so you can see we have taken it and split it into that vertical fork. So we've brought up the starting point to the very top, and now it's really clear where to start reading this figure. We have this kind of one starting point with that bold text, and we've brought the other bold text at the bottom. And we've actually separated this right away into these kind of 2 different outcomes, stress resilient and stress vulnerable. We've actually boxed in all of the information that is specific to that outcome. So you're not like in this figure, maybe coming across reading just this and then starting to follow these other arrows. You know to read this title and then all of the information that pertains to it. We've also, you can see here, shrunken down these arrows. So frequently in a lot of figures, you get a lot of arrows either showing movement or labeling items or showing an increase or a decrease. If we use arrows for everything and we use them all at the same scale, it can get really confusing because it really does distract your eye and move it around the canvas in different areas. So shrinking down this arrow to show the decrease, it helps not distract us thinking that we're moving to another step and wanting to follow it. So we've shrunken that down, brought it to the side, grouped everything in these boxes. This has helped us put it in this kind of forked configuration. And then we've brought out this kind of other outcome at the bottom. And we can clearly see all of these factors that kind of impact these outcomes here. So follows our fork-shaped vertical composition. And overall, I think this is a much more successful figure. The first one, it really wasn't that bad, but now it's much easier to follow, and I can clearly see what information should be grouped together. So a really great exercise for you to do with any of your figures. And like I said, you don't even need a scientist to do it with you. You can just ask anyone to look at your figure and kind of mark it up and show how they're reading it. Okay, let's move on to our next category of tips, text and labels. So if you remember from the NIH page, many of the considerations listed were in regards to text. Specifically, they mentioned figures and labels are readable in the size they will appear in the application. So it is always important to think about how your figure will look in situ. Grant figures are typically quite small, so what might work well for your publication or graphical abstract might not work for your grant since it needs to be shrunk down. In general, we recommend to kind of over-index and make your fonts a little bit larger than you would normally, and maybe a little bit more than what is comfortable. But one thing you can do, and you can do this before you even finish your figure, is export it and resize it to fit in a block of text kind of like this. So even if your grant isn't done or your application isn't done, you just want to think about and kind of visualize how it's going to look in the hands of the reviewer. So you can kind of mock that up just as long as everything is being viewed at 100% scale. And then you can see if your text labels are going to be large enough. So in this case here, I can see I can read this text, but if this was 100%, I'd have a really hard time reading any of these labels. I've also seen some examples of this where you get the description of the figure underneath, and that text kind of blends in with all of the other text that it is within. So this here is just an example. I've literally just put this over top, but as long as you're doing this and everything's scaled to 100%, you can kind of mock this up as you're creating your figure and make sure that everything is scaled correctly. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is creating a hierarchy of text in your figures. So a hierarchy of text is really important in design because it's going to allow a reader to understand at a glance the order of importance of the information at hand. So you can use text size, weight, color to guide your reader's eyes around your page and kind of group information together. So as you can see in this example here, you're always going to read this kind of boldest, largest text first. And then regardless of order of this text, so even though this is at the top, because it's so small, I'm always going to read from the boldest, largest text and then work my way through that hierarchy. And then I'll end up at here, this kind of small labels that usually are just kind of showing me some extra detail and context for the figure. So it's really important to establish this hierarchy of text. And I have a few examples of, once again, some before and afters to go through so we can see kind of the impact that creating that hierarchy has. Okay, so here I have another figure. Once again, this was submitted as one of our figure makeovers. So someone was really kind to submit this for us, really kind of brave to let us mark it up and make it over. And once again, this is a pretty good figure. They've got some great icons. They've kind of boxed and grouped information together. And they do have a hierarchy of text. So I can see we've got kind of these bolded main headers here. And then we have these milestones that are also bolded. And then we also have these objectives. But the one issue that I'm seeing here is that when I look at this figure, the first thing that I look at are these kind of part 1, part 2, and then this prediction and follow-up tests, which maybe is kind of like our part 3 headers. And I think that's good because that is kind of the main groupings of information. But then after I look at those headers, I kind of jump over everything that's in this box. And I jump right down to this milestone here because that's the next level in my hierarchy. So I'm going from this part 1 biomarker discovery down to milestones 1 and 2. And then I come over to milestone 3. I completely jump over this box here. And I come over to milestone 4. And it's not until I kind of go through those that then I go back and I notice these objectives. And I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do. I think these objectives are kind of the same importance of these milestones. And I can see that they've tried to kind of create another hierarchy here by boxing in this text. We've got this like box within a box, but I don't think it's really effective because it's kind of now just made the figure a little bit busier with all of these boxes. it's still not really standing out to me and I jump over it completely. And I only start taking in this information when I come and start taking in these labels as well. So what our team did with this instead was this figure here is our after. And I'll zoom in and center it here. So what we did is we actually put this milestone text at the same level as this objective text. We made them the same weight and size. And now when I read through this, I start at my biomarker discovery title. I know then to come through and I read through each of these boxes, their headers. And then I go back and I start processing any of these labels. So they've actually reduced the hierarchy by kind of one level and grouped these together. But I'm able to process this information a lot easier. And we've even, since we've removed those boxes within boxes and used this bolded text instead, we've been able to save a little bit of space as well. So if I come back up to my before, you can see part one, it all fit here, but part two had to kind of go in this L shape off to the side. And I think that's because, yeah, we were taking up a lot of space with these headers and these boxes within boxes. So here we've kind of colored in these boxes to help separate the information a little bit better. And we've been able to kind of neatly line everything up here and save a little bit of space. Okay, a few other tips in regards to text. So one of them is for labeling. So anytime you are labeling a figure, I know the instinct to label a figure, if I come up here to my insert line and arrow, is to get an arrow, take this label and say, okay, frontal lobe is there. And then do the same thing over here, my parietal lobe, it's here. But as I mentioned before, if you have a lot of arrows on your page and you're using arrows to convey both movement, maybe flow, as well as leading people to other steps, if we're also using arrows for labeling items, you might even be using them to show an increase or a decrease in something. It's going to get really confusing. So I do recommend whenever you're labeling an item, not to use this arrowhead here, but rather to use, and I'm going to pull out my properties panel here for my arrow. But we have these arrows here with just the little dots on the end. And this is what I'd actually recommend using anytime you're labeling an object, especially if it's like anatomy image and you have a bunch of labels. I would always use this little dot on the end, and I would actually also use this kind of right angle option. And I'll show you why. So this arrow here, I can kind of just turn it into that. So if I click on this little white node here, I can kind of pull this out and make that angle. So I can now kind of shape it so I have this nice little leader line coming out of my label. And then this here works as like a little telescope. I can then go and point to whatever I need to point to. And then I would also take this arrow, and in my properties panel, I can change that arrowhead to a dot. So here now, instead of this arrow here, I can kind of have these really neat leader lines that are easy for stacking. And then I have this dot that isn't going to confuse me and make me think that maybe something is moving. So that's what I would always recommend if you are labeling an object like so. And you can also use a few other tricks when labeling, so you don't always need to use arrows and lines. So in this specific case, I actually probably don't even need these lines and arrows. So obviously there are going to be times when you do need them, especially if you're labeling a lot of things. But in this case, because we've actually marked out these lobes with specific colors, I could probably just use color to label my figure and save even more space. So if I deleted these arrows here, I could probably actually just take this box that my label is in and color match it to this section here. And that is going to kind of do the labeling for me. So if I take this shape, I can change the fill and use my color picker to pick up this exact color. And then now my text doesn't have really good contrast with that background. So I'd probably also change that to be white. And then maybe I would also make it bold. And it probably doesn't need an outline either. But I think this here is equally as effective as using that arrow. And it looks a little bit neater. And I've been able to save some space. So I can do the same thing over here and just use my color to label this figure. All right, and if I did that for all of them, it should be really clear which lobe that I'm labeling with that label. All right, and coming down here, I have another example that I just want to apply a few of these tips that we just went through on. So here is actually one of our templates from our template gallery. But what I did is I kind of just removed the text hierarchy that it had and changed a few things. So here, looking at this figure, you can see I've got my header at the top, but then I just kind of have a lot of text and icons, and there's not really any separation here. If I look a little closer, I can see that I actually have two subheaders. So what I probably want to do to break this up is to add in that hierarchy of text. So I can maybe bold both of these, and I could even italicize them. And just doing that actually has kind of segmented this figure into two sections. And it's already a lot clearer that I have kind of this section here to go through and then this one down here. I could make it actually even clearer. I could come up here and insert a shape and maybe put all of this in a box. So if I thought it was still a little unclear, I could do this, make it a transparent box, and then I could even give it a dash. Let's do that. All right, and I've kind of further segmented that information there. Another thing I noticed about this figure is, once again, we have these arrows, and these arrows are kind of leading us to our next steps, but I find these arrows to be a little bit distracting. Anytime we have this kind of arrow on an angle like this, and this one is also quite bold. So what I like to do with these arrows is actually take these little nodes here and curve them out. So in our last example, we curved it out at kind of like a right angle. But over here with our line type, we can specify what kind of curve we want. So if I didn't want it to be a right angle, like we saw before, this elbow, I could switch it to a curved elbow, or to just a curve or an S shape like this. And I find having these kind of curved arrows here is a lot easier to follow, and it looks a lot smoother. So I would do this. I would probably also make this a little less bold. So maybe do a weight of 2. And then I would do the same thing for this arrow, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just Alt drag to duplicate this and flip it. So I get the exact same arrow on either side. And this looks a lot nicer than that kind of bold angled arrow, is having this kind of nice gentle curve leading us to our next step. I would also recommend, if you were ever making like a signaling pathway, which has a lot of arrows directing you around, to always kind of add in these gentle curves, just to make it a little bit easier on the eyes to look at and follow. Okay, so that was our second category, our text and labels. Our next category is alignment and spacing. So in the NIH recommendations, they did say to use white space effectively. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into white space, I want to talk about aligning objects in BioRender. Since having properly aligned objects is really important, you probably notice anytime you look at a figure, if something is slightly unaligned, it's always going to catch your eye, and it's just going to make the figure look a little bit less professional. So for that reason, we have 4 different ways to align objects in BioRender. So if I want to align these 4 antibodies here, I can either align them with grid lines. So on the right-hand side, in my navigational toolbar here, I've got this little grid I can enable. And it's just like putting graph paper on my canvas. I can enable that, and I could change the scale of these squares if I wanted to. But this kind of just lets me use the space on my page really wisely. And I can kind of eyeball how to align these objects with these lines. So that'd be one way that I could do this if I like working with this grid. Alternatively, I could also use guidelines. So if I disable this grid, I could also use this ruler, which is the option above it. Turning that ruler on, it shows up on the top and on the left. I can right click it. So right now it's in inches. I can change it to centimeters. I can also, anywhere that I click on this ruler up at the top, it will drop a guideline for me. So if I wanted to align all of these, maybe at the bottom, I could drop that guideline there and start using that to align. I find this really helpful for aligning objects on kind of opposite sides of the page. I also find it really helpful for kind of marking out maybe margins on your figures. So if you are trying to be mindful of your white space and keep it even around the edges, you can drop down these guidelines for that as well. And then if it ever gets too busy, you can also disable them. Now, the third way of aligning, you probably saw already as I was going, is this kind of auto align functionality, these little red lines that pop up as I move icons around. And they're always going to be trying to align objects with objects near to it. It can be a little bit more difficult to use if objects are really far away. So that's when I would recommend using this grid or ruler. But that enable alignment, if we go to view, you can turn it on and off from here. So if you don't have it on currently, you can enable it here in view. Or if you find it a little bit annoying, you can also disable it. All right, and then our final way to align is really similar if you are used to working in PowerPoint. Any objects that I select, and if I select multiple of them, so here holding Shift and selecting all of my antibodies, I could have done that quicker actually if I selected one and then select same icons, I would get them all. And then I can just come up here to align and select how I would like to align them. So if I want them to align in the center, I can click that. And then I could also distribute them horizontally. So the align feature we also have available. Any objects you have selected, it'll pop up at the top, or you can right click to, oh no, that one's arranged. Sorry, just at the top for align. Okay, so that was aligning. Now we'll go on to negative space. So when you hear about negative space or white space, it is the negative space that you create with objects and shapes. So if I zoom in here, you see a lot of these figures, and we've seen a few already in this presentation that are kind of boxes within boxes. So your negative space would be anywhere that there is not an icon or text. And it doesn't have to be white. So this up here would be white space, but so would this space in this box here. If I were to highlight all of the white space in this figure, it would be what is highlighted with this pink here. And kind of what your goal is with this white space. If you're trying to look at your white space and see how you can make your figure better, your goal is you want to keep it as even as possible. So anytime it's kind of bordering your figure like this, you want this side to be even with this side. Same with inside these boxes. You want all of this white space to be as even surrounding your figure as possible. So if we look at an example, once again, this was submitted by someone for one of our makeovers. You can see that this figure has a lot of white space. A lot of our icons are kind of grouped in the middle. And then these headers off to the side are also creating a lot of white space over here. So if I were to highlight all of this white space, I'd be looking at, let's see, I can grab my annotation tool again. Oh, doesn't want to pop up. Oh, there it is. Okay, so if I were to highlight all of our white space, we would have all of this section up here. We would have all of this down on the side. There's like a big chunk here, a little bit along here, but then also all of these big chunks in here, and again on the side down here. So like I said before, we want to aim to make this white space as even as possible. So even if I were to just, let's see, change my canvas size and start trying to even it out that way, So if I just reduce some of this white space on the edges, since everything's kind of cluttered in the middle, this is already starting to look a little bit better. So I could apply that. That's a little bit better. I still have a lot of white space here though. Same with over here. And maybe I would want to, so here I can see this process, they both start with a normal cell. So maybe I would actually want to have this cell as a starting point and then have it kind of fork into both of these outcomes. And then that would take up this space a little bit better. Same with if I come down here, I can see this bottom section, we're getting a lot of white space because we've kind of offset this icon here. So maybe I actually want to bring this more down and in line. And I can see why they offset it. They're trying to show that they're zooming in on this tumor here. But I think we can accomplish the same thing if we have it down here. And then we maybe just bring this arrow. Let's see here. Over here. And maybe we can kind of accomplish that same kind of zoom in effect just by using a tapered arrow. So I can come over here for my arrow and make it a line taper. And then maybe I'll make it just a little bit bigger like this. So it looks kind of like it's going small and getting larger. I have a giant arrowhead now, so I might also want to decrease the size of that. All right. And I think that kind of accomplishes the same thing. And now we've kind of freed up some space up here. We could bring this header down. And everything's starting to look a lot better, actually, now that this is all nicely aligned and we've kind of decreased all that white space. I could probably then start maybe moving this one down like so. But I won't spend too much time kind of tweaking this figure. I wanted to show you some of my thought process here. But this is actually what we came up with as the final outcome. So you can see we actually brought those headers down and in line. So we kind of aligned everything in these straight rows. We've also separated each step with this kind of a little bit transparent dotted line. So just kind of suggesting these different sections. This icon's been aligned. We've also added in this kind of forked flow in two different sections to help keep everything kind of in this horizontal alignment, but still show that we have these different outcomes. And I think if we were to outline the white space in this figure, it is much more even. You can see I have a much more even amount going around my edges as well as in between my steps. So much easier to follow this one compared to this one. And this is one that we already marked up a little bit. Okay, our last section of tips, and we have 10 minutes to go through. So color and contrast. First thing I want to talk about are the dimensions of color. So when we talk about color, there are 3 dimensions to that color. You have your color hue, and that would be the actual color that we're talking about. So if we look at a color wheel here, we have yellow as a hue, green as a hue, red, orange, blue, purple. Those are our different hues. And then if we look at one of those hues, so if we took red, we could also then describe it in terms of its value, so how light or dark it is, and then its chroma, so how saturated that color is. So grayscale on the left, and then it gets more and more saturated as we go right here. The other thing to keep in mind is that any colors opposite of each other on this wheel, they're contrasting colors. So they are colors that couldn't be more different from each other. And contrasting colors are actually really helpful in highlighting elements. So when we pair 2 contrasting colors together, since they couldn't be any more different from each other, those colors are really going to pop out against each other. So you see this all the time, using color to help highlight. So here on the left is some examples. You can see they've tried to highlight the lungs here, and then here maybe this bacteria, I guess maybe. And since they wanted to highlight these specific elements and the background is primarily blue, they've selected the contrasting color orange. So if we look at that wheel, blue, orange is opposite of it because orange is going to be what stands out the most against a blue background. Now we can take this same concept and we can apply it to our figures. So this figure here, we have, it's just one of our templates. But when I look at it, since it is a mainly blue cell, that's kind of the dominant color in this template, anywhere that I then use orange, the contrasting color, I'm going to highlight. So in this figure, I don't think that they're actually specifically talking about these orange receptors, but if that was the main character, that's the correct color to use for it, because when I look at this figure, the first thing I see are these two orange receptors here. So a really great way to highlight kind of those really important characters in your figure. And then alternatively, so here we're using kind of color associations to our advantage. We also used color association to our advantage when we were labeling the lobes of the brain in that template we looked at a little bit ago. But another thing to keep in mind would be color kind of creating associations that you didn't intend for. So this is an example of a figure that we just took from Google. I apologize, it's not very high quality in terms of resolution. But what I wanted to show you here was that they've used a lot of color in their text. So they've kind of, these labels over here are in red and then blue and then green at the bottom. And they kind of correlate with these groups that are also in the same color palette. And when I look at this figure, I see this end group here in the red, and then I see this label also in the red for novel reagent class, and then I see this text over here in the red, and I think that they're all connected. So my mind wants to associate these labels with this group here. Same thing down here, all of this green text, I want to associate with these kind of green R groups, and then blue with these blue groups here. And I don't think that's the intention of this figure. So here is an example of where color is kind of doing you a disservice because you've used the same color palette and repeated the same colors throughout your figure, but those items are not supposed to be connected together. So we can use color to highlight concepts and to our advantage to help with labeling, but also always be mindful if you're using the same color for different objects that you could be creating incorrect color associations. Okay, a few other color associations we can use to our advantage would be color temperature. So when we think of colors and the different hues, we can kind of assign a temperature to them. So warm colors would be any of those like reds, yellows, and oranges, and then cool colors would be your kind of blues and greens, maybe like a cool purple. And our brain likes to make associations with warm and cool colors. There's kind of this concept of heroes and villains. So typically we'll see villains depicted in this kind of warm color palette and then heroes in this kind of cooler color palette. I'm trying to see if I added some examples down here. I did not. But where we can use this in scientific figures is that if your brain likes to associate villains with that warm color palette, maybe because it kind of signifies like aggression or inflammation, whereas that cool color palette is supposed to be a little bit more calming. We can use that to our advantage when our figure has really clear heroes and villains. So here I have a cancer cell and some immune cells coming. And right now I have the immune cells in this kind of warm color palette and the cancer cell in this cool green shade. And it kind of looks like the immune cells are the villains here and the cancer cell is the good guy. So I would actually flip this color palette here and you're going to kind of understand the figure more intuitively right off the bat when I do that. So if I select these here and I put my heroic immune cells in my cool colors, so go for maybe a light blue, maybe a green, and a purple. And then my cancer cell, I can depict in kind of that warm, more aggressive shade. So maybe go with like a red cancer cell, or maybe this one here. I like this one. All right, so this already to me looks a little bit better with our aggressive warm colored cancer cell there. few other examples of color association used in our templates. So this is that same template that we already saw. And I just wanted to point out how they used kind of color in this to help tell their story. So here I can see we have our tumor cells in red and CAR T cells in green. They've selected contrasting colors here. So two colors that couldn't be more different from each other, red and green. And our tumor cells, they're our villains. So they are in red. And we can kind of follow that story throughout the entire figure. So over here with our labels and our graphs, it then comes over here, our tumor cells are in red. We're injecting our CAR T green. And then we can follow that right through to our graphs and our labels. And it's a really clear color story here and really clear characters that are differentiated. All right, and I only have a few minutes, so I've got 2 more tips I'm going to fly through. And this one here is just a tip on using opacity. So sometimes when we are layering text on top of icons or icons on top of icons, like in this example here, we have these kind of lymph nodes and tumors labeled, and they're over top of this lung icon. And we have these kind of organs here to provide context of where this is happening. And then the main story really is these lymph nodes and this tumor that's changing in size. So I think the tumor gets a little bit lost against this lung background. So what I would actually do is take that icon. I can take both icons here. And then in my panel, I can come to my transparency and increase it. And that's just going to fade that icon out. So now my tumor and lymph nodes are going to stand out a lot more, but I still get that context of where this is happening. And I can bring it up to pretty much 60, that transparency. And this story that's being told stands out a lot more, and I still get that context. So I can do that with all of these, just selecting the organs and then changing this to 60. All right, and this story now is really clear. And overall, I think, yeah, this is a much better figure. I don't get kind of these colors lost against the backdrop. So anytime you're layering those icons, you can look at reducing the transparency of what's in the background to help it pop. All right, and my final tip here is just for color contrast. So once again, something to keep in mind when you're layering text on icons or icons on icons, that if maybe you can't reduce the transparency of what's in the background, then you want to make sure you're selecting your colors really wisely. So of course, I said before, orange will really pop against a blue background. The exception for that is if the value of the colors you've selected are too similar. And a way that you can check this, so here I have orange on top of blue, which you would think would stand out a lot better. And then I have blue on top of blue, which you think would be much worse and harder to read because it's the same color. But if I actually enable the grayscale functionality here, so I'm just removing the actual hue of the color, then you can see that this DNA here actually almost completely disappears because the contrast is so similar. This text over here is harder to read compared to this example at the bottom, which were in the same color, but just had that higher contrast between the colors. So darker colors on top of the lighter colors. So always remember to check your contrast. We have this view canvas and grayscale built right in, so you can check your figures and just make sure that you can still see everything when you turn that on. It's also available when you go to export as like a final check. All right, and we are at time, so there's my grayscale. I just want to leave everyone with this tweet that we received from a reviewer. And he said, writing a lockdown review article, the writers say, I'll do the figures at the end, and the reviewers will say, I'll review the figures at the start. So his tips were to take time, get help and feedback, look at lots of examples. He also plugged us and said, consider illustration software, which was really nice. But the main thing to keep in mind here is don't let your figures be an afterthought, since they are frequently the first thing that reviewers look at and will leave an impression on them. All right, and thank you everyone for joining me today. And a special thank you to Brooke for helping us organize this and helping to bring BioRender to Queen's University and the Queen's Cardiopulmonary Unit. I hope you guys all have a really great day and found this valuable. I recorded and I'll share the recording with everyone. And if you have any questions about the license specifically, then you can reach out to either Schnell, whose email I've provided here, or to Brooke.
Thank you so much, Sydney. That was great.
Awesome. All right. And I'm 2 minutes over, so I'll give everyone their time back and we can wrap up. So I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.